Ethan Brooks had always considered himself prepared for almost anything. As a human diplomat, he had trained for high-stakes negotiations, interstellar politics, and the occasional alien misunderstanding. But nothing had prepared him for this moment. Standing in the grand hall of the Zarai Palace, he looked around at the alien architecture that seemed to defy gravity and logic. The walls shimmered with a soft blue light that pulsed gently, as if the building itself were alive. The ceiling arched high above, filled with patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles, and everywhere Ethan looked, there were Zarai dignitaries dressed in ceremonial robes that gleamed like liquid metal. He straightened his tie, or rather the human approximation of a tie. Since formal Earth clothing had been somewhat adapted for this environment, his heart pounded, not entirely from fear, but from the awareness that his every word, every gesture, every glance was being scrutinized by beings whose culture he barely understood. Beside him, Claire Morgan, his trusted advisor, whispered reminders in his ear. She had been with him on countless diplomatic missions, but even she looked slightly uneasy. Ryan Cole, the security officer, stood a few steps behind, his posture rigid and alert, scanning the room for potential threats. Ethan had been briefed extensively. The Zarai valued ceremony, symbolism, and subtlety above all else. Every speech, every offering, every bow could carry meanings layered like the rings of a tree. The problem was that some of these meanings were not obvious to humans. What might be a polite expression of respect to a human could, in Zarai culture, be interpreted as a profound personal commitment. As the ceremony began, Ethan was escorted to the center of the hall. Queen Lyrithia, ruler of the Zarai, descended a short set of steps onto a raised platform. She was tall, her presence commanding, with eyes that seemed to look not just at him, but into him. Her skin had a subtle iridescence, and she moved with a grace that seemed almost liquid. The Zarai court murmured among themselves, their voices melodic in a way that resonated in the hall. Ethan had been told to maintain composure, to project confidence and respect. He nodded to the queen and gave a courteous bow. He had prepared his speech carefully, rehearsed every phrase, every gesture. Yet, as he began to speak, the words felt strangely formal, almost ceremonial. He talked about Earth's commitment to peace, the hope for cooperation, and the shared prosperity of their species. He emphasized trust, loyalty, and long-term friendship. To him, it was a standard diplomatic address, meant to honor the queen and her people. But as he spoke, he noticed subtle changes in the room. The Zarai courtiers stiffened. Their heads tilted slightly, a sign of heightened attention. Queen Lyrathia's eyes narrowed, and then, unexpectedly, a small, almost imperceptible smile curved her lips. Ethan, entirely unaware of the significance, continued using phrases like "bound by our mutual respect" and "pledged to uphold your honor in all ways." To him, these were normal diplomatic expressions, emphasizing duty and respect. To the Zarai, however, they carried a much deeper implication. Claire nudged him gently, whispering, "Ethan, maybe slow down. Look at them. Something's different." "I'm fine," Ethan whispered back, trying to keep his own voice calm. "Just focus on the words." He glanced at Ryan, whose eyes were sharp, scanning the queen's reactions. But even Ryan, trained to read subtle cues, seemed momentarily caught off guard. The tension in the room grew, not from hostility, but from expectation. The queen's smile widened slightly, and Ethan noticed a glimmer of curiosity in her gaze. He assumed she was intrigued by Earth's approach to diplomacy. He had no idea that, according to Zarai tradition, the phrases he had used were considered a formal and irrevocable pledge of personal commitment, akin to a marriage proposal. Ethan concluded his speech with a flourish, bowing deeply. "We come not as conquerors, but as partners," he said. "And I pledge that humanity will honor the bonds we form here today with the utmost respect and loyalty." For a moment, there was silence. The Zarai court seemed frozen, as though the hall itself were holding its breath. Ethan straightened, confident that he had delivered his message flawlessly. Then Queen Lyrathia spoke. Her voice was melodic, resonant, and carried through the hall like a soft wave. "I accept," she said. Ethan froze. He blinked, convinced he had misheard. I don't understand, he stammered. The courtiers reacted immediately, bowing and murmuring in a language that sounded like music to human ears. Ethan turned to Claire and Ryan, hoping for guidance, but Claire's face was pale. And Ryan looked as if he were trying to remain composed while silently panicking. Ethan, Claire whispered, I think she just accepted what you said. It's serious. Ethan's mind raced. Accepted? What do you mean accepted? I didn't propose anything. Claire shook her head. Ethan, I think you need to understand something about Zarai culture. Words have different weight here. What you said? Those phrases. It's not just diplomacy. It's a commitment. A vow. It's personal. Ethan's stomach dropped. He tried to speak again, but protocol prevented him from interrupting the Queen's declaration. The courtiers continued their murmurs, and the Queen's smile remained serene, almost amused. He realized that the entire hall was now focused on him, awaiting his response. Even though he had no idea how to respond appropriately. Every human instinct told him to clarify, to backtrack, to explain that he had no intention of pledging himself personally, but tradition and ceremony forbade him from doing so without causing offense. Ryan stepped closer, his hand lightly on Ethan's shoulder. Just stay calm, he said. We'll figure this out. Don't say anything rash. Ethan nodded, though he felt like the floor beneath him had disappeared. The Queen's acceptance had created a situation far more complicated than any interstellar treaty he had ever faced. And yet, even in the panic, he couldn't help but notice something unexpected. Queen Larathia's expression wasn't one of anger or malice. She was amused, curious, and perhaps in some small way, genuinely interested in him as a person. That realization brought a strange calm amid the chaos. He thought back to all the training, all the briefings. They had prepared him for negotiations, for threats, for cultural misunderstandings, but not for this. Not for an accidental vow that could have political and personal consequences across galaxies. His mind raced through possibilities, each more absurd and terrifying than the last. Was this binding under Zarai law? Could he refuse? Would humans be considered dishonorable if he tried? Claire leaned in again. Ethan, look at her. She's watching you. I don't think this is entirely serious yet, but we have to tread carefully. One wrong move and, well, it could spiral. Ethan swallowed hard, trying to focus. Okay, he said quietly. Just stay calm, observe, respond carefully. He turned back to the Queen, who inclined her head slightly. Her smile remained, a subtle curve that conveyed amusement, expectation, and challenge all at once. The courtiers waited. The human delegation waited. Ethan realized that this moment was no longer about diplomacy or negotiation. It was about understanding, intuition, and human character in a way he had never anticipated as he stood there. He began to appreciate the gravity of the situation. The words he had chosen, the phrases that seemed innocuous in human culture, had profound meaning here. His intention, while honorable and respectful, had inadvertently crossed a line into a deeply personal and binding commitment in Zarai tradition. He could feel the weight of the hall's attention, the subtle energy of expectation that seemed to press upon him from all sides. Ethan took a deep breath and tried to steady himself. He reminded himself of the qualities that had brought him this far: honesty, integrity, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. He might have made a mistake, but he could still control his actions, his demeanor, and his words. He began to think about what it meant to be human in a situation like this, to face the unknown, to navigate complexity with clarity, and to uphold principles even when misunderstandings threatened disaster. Minutes felt like hours as he stood before Queen Larathia, feeling the weight of centuries of Zarai tradition and the eyes of countless witnesses upon him. He realized that in that moment he was not just representing humanity in the political sense, but in the moral sense as well. His behavior, his courage, and his judgment would define the human presence in this part of the galaxy for years to come. Finally, he allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible nod. Not a bow, not a gesture of submission, but a sign of acknowledgement. He would not reject her words outright. That would be disrespectful. But he would navigate the situation carefully, thoughtfully, and with human integrity. He met her gaze steadily, hoping to convey understanding without conceding more than necessary. As the ceremony continued, Ethan realized that this moment, terrifying as it was, also presented an opportunity. An opportunity to demonstrate that humans were capable not only of diplomacy, but of honor, honesty, and courage under pressure. In a way, this misunderstanding had become a test of character, test of human adaptability, and perhaps even a test of trust between two very different species. And so, standing in the center of the Zerai Palace, surrounded by beauty, alien complexity, and expectation, Ethan Brooks took the first steps into a challenge he had never imagined. Unaware that this moment would mark the beginning of a story that would be remembered in both human and Zerai history, he had realized too late the weight of his words. But he was determined that the consequences, whatever they might be, would reflect the best of humanity, not its mistakes. Ethan Brooks could hardly believe what was happening. Just moments ago, he had been delivering a routine diplomatic speech. And now he was caught in a web of misunderstanding that seemed both absurd and serious. Queen Lorethia had publicly accepted his words as a personal vow, and the Zerai court had immediately responded with a mixture of murmurs, clues, and gestures that Ethan could not comprehend. He glanced at Claire Morgan, who looked equally stunned, and Ryan Cole, whose face was set in a tight line of concern. The Queen's smile had not faded. Instead, it seemed to grow, a subtle but unmistakable expression of amusement and curiosity. Ethan tried to speak, to clarify that his words had been meant as diplomacy, not as a personal pledge. But every time he opened his mouth, protocol intervened. The Zerai had strict rules about interrupting a royal declaration, and doing so would be seen as disrespectful. He felt trapped, a spectator in his own mistake. A court official approached, bowing deeply. He spoke in the Zerai language, rapid and melodic, and a translator immediately rendered the words into human speech. The pledge has been accepted. The union is recognized under Zerai custom. The honored human must remain within the palace until further arrangements are made. Ethan's stomach sank. Wait, what? Remain in the palace? Claire grabbed his arm, her voice low. They're taking you under royal protection. It's part of their law. They don't see this as a threat. It's a formality. But it's serious. You have to comply. Ethan nodded slowly. Right, of course. Compliance. He was escorted to a side chamber. A large room filled with soft glowing lights and furniture that seemed to float slightly above the ground. It was luxurious, but also unfamiliar, designed for beings with different anatomy and comfort needs. The walls shimmered like water, and the floor was smooth but warm beneath his feet. He could hear the faint echo of music from the main hall, a harmony that seemed almost alive. Queen Lorethia followed him, gliding gracefully as though she barely touched the floor. Her presence was overwhelming, and yet oddly comforting. She stopped a few feet away and regarded him with eyes that seemed to see into his thoughts. Ethan Brooks, she said softly, you speak in honor and truth. That is rare, even among humans. Yet you are unaware of what you have pledged. I, your majesty. I didn't mean, Ethan began. But she raised a hand, silencing him. You will have time to understand. For now, you must respect our customs, as we respect yours. The human delegation will remain nearby, but you will stay here, under protection. It is for your safety and ours. Ethan swallowed hard. Protection, yes. Safety understood. I thank you, your majesty. Claire and Ryan were allowed to enter the chamber, though they maintained a respectful distance. Claire whispered, this is more than I expected. We need to think carefully about every move. One wrong word, one wrong gesture, and it could escalate. Ryan nodded. Agreed, but we also need to figure out how to manage this diplomatically. She hasn't shown any hostility. That's a good sign. Ethan took a deep breath. I have to get this right. I need to understand them better, and fast. Over the next few hours, scholars and advisors from both sides convened to discuss the incident. Zari experts explained the significance of his words. Translating the nuances of their culture that human diplomats had missed, Ethan listened intently, realizing how delicate the situation was. Even a small misstep could be interpreted as dishonor or disrespect, leading to political complications that might span galaxies. He learned that in Zari tradition, words were powerful beyond human imagination. A statement made in sincerity was binding, and intent was considered as important as action. The Queen's acceptance was both a test and a declaration, showing that she valued his honesty and courage. Ethan began to understand that this was not about forcing him into a literal union, but about establishing trust and demonstrating character. Throughout the day, Ethan observed Queen Larethia carefully. She was a figure of strength and intelligence, but she also displayed moments of curiosity and even humor. She asked him questions about Earth, about human traditions, and about his own experiences. Ethan answered as honestly as he could, trying to convey not just information, but human values, integrity, adaptability, and empathy. As the hours passed, the initial shock began to wear off, replaced by a cautious understanding. Ethan realized that he could navigate this situation by being transparent, respectful, and thoughtful. The Queen's amusement was not at him, but at the novelty of human perspective. He had an opportunity to show that humans could meet the Zari on equal moral and intellectual ground. Claire leaned over during a quiet moment. "You're doing well," she said softly. "Just remember, it's not about avoiding mistakes. It's about showing character." Ethan nodded. He felt the weight of responsibility, not just for himself, but for humanity. Every word he spoke, every action he took, would be observed, analyzed, and remembered. This misunderstanding had thrust him into a position where human qualities and honesty, courage, and integrity were his greatest tools. As evening approached, the palace shifted subtly. The lighting changed, casting soft golden hues across the room, and the distant music took on a more rhythmic pattern. The Zari seemed to move with a natural grace, each motion intentional, each gesture meaningful. Ethan realized that every element of this culture was designed to communicate without words, and understanding it required more than observation. It required intuition. Queen Larethia returned to speak with him privately. "Ethan Brooks," she said, her voice carrying warmth and authority.
"Oh yeah?
"You are far from fully understanding the meaning of today's events. Yet I see honesty in your heart, and that is rare. You will remain under our roof, not as a captive, but as a guest and participant in our customs. You may learn, and in doing so, you will demonstrate the qualities of your species." Ethan bowed slightly, unsure what else to do. "I am honored, Your Majesty. I will do my best to learn and to respect your ways." She nodded, her smile gentle. "Then you will not fail entirely, human. And perhaps in time you will understand the deeper purpose behind what has occurred." As the night deepened, Ethan reflected on the day's events. What had begun as a diplomatic routine had become a profound lesson in cultural understanding, moral courage, and personal responsibility. He had realized too late the weight of his words. But now he understood that the path forward depended not on undoing the past, but on navigating the present with clarity and integrity. Claire and Ryan remained by his side, providing support and guidance. They discussed strategies for engagement, noting the importance of patience, observation, and careful communication. Ethan felt a sense of quiet determination growing within him. He would face this challenge as a human with honesty, adaptability, and the hope that his actions could bridge the gap between worlds. The palace was vast and mysterious. Yet within its walls, Ethan began to find a strange sense of belonging, not because of the vow he had unknowingly made, but because of the opportunity it presented, a chance to show the strength of human character, to earn trust, and to demonstrate that even in misunderstanding, humans could rise to meet extraordinary challenges. As he lay down to rest that evening, Ethan realized that the events of the day were only the beginning. The true test would come as he interacted with the Queen, the court, and the scholars, learning their ways while representing humanity. But for the first time since the misunderstanding occurred, he felt a flicker of confidence. He was no longer just a human who had made a mistake. He was a human who had the chance to turn that mistake into a demonstration of his species' best qualities. And in a galaxy where misunderstanding could have grave consequences, that was a powerful position to hold. Ethan Brooks awoke to the soft, glowing light of the Zari Palace filtering through the translucent walls. The morning was calm, but he felt an undercurrent of tension. The events of the previous day continued to weigh heavily on his mind. What had started as a simple, diplomatic speech had turned into a situation he'd barely understood, yet the implications stretched far beyond him. He got out of the unusual floating bed, taking a moment to orient himself to the unfamiliar gravity and surfaces. Claire Morgan was already up, reviewing notes and translations from the Zari scholars. Ryan Cole stood by the window, his eyes scanning the palace grounds with habitual vigilance. Both had been invaluable allies through the unfolding crisis, but even they were unsure of the best course of action. Ethan joined them, taking a deep breath, reminding himself that humans had always adapted in strange circumstances, and this would be no different. Their first meeting of the day was with the Zari advisors and legal scholars. Ethan learned that the Queen's acceptance of his speech was considered binding under their law, and while it did not immediately constitute a forced union, it created an official acknowledgement that could not be ignored. Human legal systems could not override it, and diplomacy required delicate handling. Ethan realized that the situation was far more complex than he had imagined. The scholars explained the subtleties of Zari culture. Honor was paramount. Intent was everything, and public perception could not be easily changed. A declaration of acceptance by a queen was both symbolic and practical. It represented a commitment that the species involved were bound to respect. Ethan listened, absorbing the information with care, realizing that every word he spoke in response could shift the balance of the growing tension as the day progressed. Ethan had several private meetings with Queen Larathia. She was patient and composed, and her questions about human culture were probing. She asked about human relationships, responsibilities, and values. Ethan answered as honestly as he could, highlighting human resilience, empathy, and the ability to learn from mistakes. The Queen seemed genuinely interested in his responses, occasionally smiling at his explanations or tilting her head as she considered a new perspective. Ethan noticed that her demeanor suggested not judgment, but curiosity and engagement. At one point, she led him to a terrace overlooking the palace gardens. The gardens were unlike anything on Earth, filled with plants that glowed softly and trees that seemed to sway without wind. The air was filled with a subtle fragrance that Ethan could not identify. Larathia gestured for him to sit, and she did the same. For a while, they simply observed the quiet beauty around them. "Ethan Brooks," she said finally, "you are aware of the expectations placed upon you by my acceptance?" "Yes." "Yes, Your Majesty," Ethan replied. "I understand the importance, even if I did not fully intend it." She nodded slowly. "Intent is important. And yet, your honesty and courage in admitting your error are equally important. They are qualities we value highly." Ethan realized that this was a turning point. While he had stumbled, he had the chance to demonstrate human integrity. He could not undo what had happened, but he could show that humans could act with honor, transparency, and respect. This realization gave him a renewed sense of purpose. Back in the palace, the political aspects of the situation were becoming clearer. Rival factions within the Zari court were watching closely, each with its own agenda. Some viewed the accidental pledge as a vulnerability, a way to influence the Queen and gain power. Others saw it as an opportunity to strengthen relations with humanity. Ethan understood that he had become a symbol, not just a human diplomat, but a representation of his species. Every action he took now carried weight far beyond his personal situation. During one afternoon session, Ethan observed a group of scholars debating the meaning of his pledge. The conversation was complex, filled with references to centuries of Zari custom and law. Ethan found himself both fascinated and overwhelmed. Claire leaned over and whispered explanations, helping him navigate the layers of interpretation. He realized that his initial fear was giving way to understanding, and that human adaptability was a powerful tool in such circumstances. Ethan also began to notice the subtleties in the Queen's behavior. While she maintained authority and composure, she allowed moments of informal interaction, testing his reactions, gauging his honesty, and challenging his assumptions. He realized that she was not merely amused or curious, she was evaluating his character. How he handled mistakes, how he communicated, and how he respected the customs of her people were all being observed. Every decision he made could either build trust or erode it. In a quiet moment, Claire asked, "Ethan, how are you holding up?" He took a deep breath. "It's exhausting, but I feel like we're starting to find a rhythm. If I can stay honest and respectful, maybe we can turn this into something positive." "Exactly," she said. "They respect strength and integrity. You've got both, even if you stumbled at first." Ethan spent time learning the practicalities of Palace's life. Meals were an experience of flavors and textures unlike anything on Earth. In every gesture, how one sat, how one ate, how one spoke had significance. Ryan made notes for security and protocol, while Ethan focused on understanding and participating without offense. It was a delicate balance, but he began to see patterns. Understanding which actions conveyed respect and which could be misinterpreted. One evening, the Queen invited him to a private discussion in her chambers. The room was vast, with walls that shimmered gently, reflecting soft light. She asked him about his motivations, his principles, and his hopes for the alliance between humans and Zarai. Ethan spoke openly, expressing his desire for mutual understanding, respect, and cooperation. He emphasized that humans could learn, adapt, and honor promises once they understood their importance. Lorethia listened carefully, occasionally nodding or tilting her head. "Your words are sincere," she said. "That sincerity is more important than ceremony alone. Actions will define the outcome, Ethan Brooks, not the words spoken in haste." Ethan realized that she was giving him a way forward. He could honor the spirit of the pledge through behavior, even if the original words had been accidental. It was a lesson in ethics, trust, and the power of intention. His mind, once clouded with panic and confusion, now focused on the path ahead, acting with integrity, learning quickly, and demonstrating human qualities in a way that transcended misunderstanding. Days passed, and Ethan's presence in the palace became less of a spectacle and more of an engagement. He participated in ceremonies, observed legal debates, and interacted with court members. His willingness to learn, combined with his honesty and courage, began to earn respect. He noticed subtle changes in the Queen's demeanor, more frequent smiles, moments of shared humor, and gestures that indicated trust. She seemed genuinely interested in his perspective, and even occasionally asked for advice on matters unrelated to him personally. During a particular session with the Queen, she asked, "Ethan, do humans always act with such deliberation when faced with unknown customs?" He chuckled lightly. "Bleshlesh. Sometimes we stumble, as I did, but we try to learn, and when we understand, we do our best to act rightly." She smiled, a rare, unguarded expression. "That is what makes your species remarkable. You may err, but you adapt and uphold principles. That is a quality we value highly." Ethan felt a sense of accomplishment, tempered by the awareness that the situation was far from resolved. The political and cultural ramifications of his accidental pledge were ongoing. Yet he also recognized that humans had proven something essential: the ability to face challenges, learn quickly, and navigate complex situations with honesty and courage. As the day ended, Ethan reflected on the journey so far. What had begun as a misunderstanding had evolved into an opportunity to demonstrate human strength, integrity, and adaptability. He had faced confusion, tension, and subtle political maneuvering. Yet he had maintained composure, acted with sincerity, and earned the respect of beings far different from himself. Ethan knew that challenges were not over. Rival factions, cultural expectations, and the potential for further misunderstanding remained. But he also knew that he had begun to turn the situation in humanity's favor not through force or cunning, but through character. The Queen's observation, the court's scrutiny, and the scholars' debates had all highlighted one truth: human qualities could shine even in the most alien and complex circumstances. As he prepared for rest that night, Ethan felt a sense of cautious optimism. He had realized that understanding, honesty, and courage could bridge cultures and create trust. In a world where a single mistake could escalate into disaster, he had begun to show that humanity could rise above error, meet challenges with integrity, and forge connections even with beings who seemed impossibly different. It was a lesson he would carry forward, not just for himself, but for the reputation and future of his species. Ethan Brooks woke to the sound of soft music echoing through the halls of the Zarai Palace. The day ahead promised new challenges. As he had been summoned to participate in discussions with both human and Zarai representatives, the palace was alive with activity, courtiers moving with purpose, scholars debating in hushed tones, and security personnel ensuring order. Ethan, Claire, and Ryan prepared themselves, knowing that the events of this day could shape the future of relations between the two species. As they entered the main hall, Ethan noticed the subtle shift in atmosphere. The Queen had called a formal assembly to address not only the incident of his accidental pledge, but also the broader political consequences. Rival factions within the Zarai court were present, some observing him with interest, others with thinly veiled suspicion. Ethan felt a moment of apprehension, but reminded himself of the principles he had relied on since the beginning: honesty, integrity, and calm observation. Queen Larathia stood at the center of the hall, her presence commanding attention. She gestured for Ethan to come forward. The courtiers fell silent, their eyes focused on the human who had inadvertently created a situation of great significance. Ethan stepped forward, taking care to bow respectfully. Every movement was deliberate, every gesture conscious of Zarai customs. Ethan Brooks, the Queen began, her voice resonating through the hall. You are aware of the concerns raised by certain factions regarding your pledge. They question your intent and your understanding of our customs. How do you respond? Ethan inhaled deeply. This was the moment to demonstrate the qualities that had brought him respect so far. Your Majesty, members of the court, he began, his voice steady. I made a mistake in understanding the meaning of my words. I did not intend to make a personal pledge, but I understand now the significance of what was spoken. My intent was to honor your people, to show respect, and to demonstrate humanity's commitment to cooperation and trust. Murmurs spread through the hall. Some Zarai nodded thoughtfully. Others exchanged quiet words. The Queen's eyes remained fixed on him, studying, evaluating. Ethan continued, I cannot change the words I used, but I can act with integrity. I can show that humans are honorable, capable of understanding, and willing to uphold our commitments once we grasp their importance. I ask for the chance to demonstrate this through action, not just speech. A senior court advisor stepped forward. Your words are sincere, human, yet we must consider the implications. Some factions fear that this acceptance could be used to influence the Queen unfairly. Ethan nodded. I understand. I do not wish to create conflict or be used as a tool. My goal is to build trust, not division. I am willing to participate in any actions that uphold fairness, justice, and mutual respect. The assembly continued, with scholars and courtiers debating. Ethan observed quietly, noting the subtleties of gestures, tones, and expressions. He realized that, in the Zarai culture, influence and persuasion were often conveyed through actions and integrity rather than direct confrontation. This insight gave him confidence. He did not need to manipulate or fight. He needed to act with honesty and clarity. During a break, Queen Larathia approached him. Ethan Brooks, your words have been heard, but actions will speak louder. Today, you will have the opportunity to demonstrate your commitment. Not to the pledge itself, but to the principles behind it. What kind of opportunity, Your Majesty? Ethan asked cautiously. A challenge, she replied, her eyes glinting with determination and curiosity. One that tests courage, judgment, and the ability to uphold honor under pressure. Ethan felt a surge of anticipation. This was no longer just about words. It was about proving human character in a way that transcended culture. He nodded respectfully. I am ready, Your Majesty. I will do my best. The Queen led him to a chamber where the rival faction had gathered, expressing concern over the accidental pledge. They were skeptical of his intentions and questioned whether humans could truly understand Zari values. Ethan listened carefully, acknowledging their concerns without defensiveness. He spoke honestly about his mistake, the lessons he had learned, and the ways he intended to act to build trust. His calm demeanor, honesty, and respect for their customs gradually shifted the room's tension. One of the faction leaders challenged him directly. "Human, how can we trust that your words will match your actions?" Ethan met the gaze steadily. "Because I will not hide from responsibility. I have made a mistake, yes, but I am committed to correcting it through conduct, not empty promises. I ask only for the chance to prove this. Actions, not words, will show my intent and humanity's integrity." The hall fell silent. The faction members exchanged glances, recognizing the sincerity in his words and the clarity in his demeanor. Even those who had been most suspicious began to nod subtly, acknowledging the honesty in his approach. Ethan felt a quiet sense of relief, but he knew the challenge was far from over. The Queen addressed the assembly again. "Ethan Brooks, you have spoken with honesty and courage. That is the first step. Now we shall observe your actions. Let this be a demonstration not of error, but of integrity, understanding, and cooperation." Ethan was assigned tasks that required collaboration with both humans and Zari. He navigated complex negotiations, facilitated discussions on shared projects, and mediated between differing viewpoints. Every decision required careful thought, respect for tradition, and a focus on fairness. His actions were observed closely, and he took care to act consistently with the principles he had espoused. As the day progressed, Ethan noticed subtle changes in the Queen's demeanor. She watched him with interest, occasionally asking for insight or perspective. Her smile, once rare, became more frequent, indicating approval. The courtiers and scholars began to show signs of respect, acknowledging that this human was capable of understanding and upholding Zari values despite the initial misunderstanding. Claire whispered during a quiet moment. "You're doing it. Ethan, they're seeing what we've always known about humans, and honesty and courage go a long way." Ryan added, "Keep it up. Every action counts. Don't overthink, just be consistent." Ethan nodded, feeling a renewed sense of determination. He realized that the challenge was not about avoiding mistakes, but about showing character, learning quickly, and demonstrating integrity in action. Each task completed, each decision made with care, reinforced the trust he was building. Even the rival faction members, once skeptical, began to acknowledge his sincerity. As evening fell, the Queen summoned him once more. She spoke privately, her voice calm yet powerful. "Ethan Brooks, today you have shown the qualities that matter: courage, honesty, and the willingness to face challenge without deception. That is more valuable than the words you spoke in haste. You have honored the spirit of the pledge, even if not the letter." Ethan felt a profound sense of relief. He bowed deeply. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I will continue to act with integrity and respect in all matters." The Queen's smile was genuine now, and she gestured for him to rise. "Human, you have learned well, and in doing so, you have earned respect, trust, and understanding. Let this day be remembered not as a mistake, but as a demonstration of character and cooperation." Ethan returned to his quarters, exhausted but invigorated. The lessons of the day were clear. Understanding, honesty, and action were more important than words alone. Misunderstandings could become opportunities if approached with integrity. He reflected on the journey so far, recognizing that what had begun as a diplomatic error had become a defining moment for humanity's presence in the Zari court. He lay down to rest, mindful of the responsibilities ahead. The challenge was ongoing, but he had demonstrated that humans could meet even alien expectations with courage, clarity, and honesty. The Queen's approval and the gradual acceptance of the court were proof that integrity transcended culture, and that understanding, even born from a mistake, could build lasting trust and respect. Ethan knew that this experience would shape his life and the future of human-Zari relations for years to come, marking the beginning of a story defined not by error, but by the strength of human character, Ethan Brooks woke to the gentle glow of the Zari Palace once again. The events of the previous days had left him both exhausted and invigorated. He had learned more than he ever anticipated about a culture that was at once alien and deeply principled. But today promised to be the most significant yet. It was the day when understanding, honesty, and action would be tested to their fullest, and the resolution of the accidental pledge would finally be addressed. The palace was already alive with activity as Ethan, Claire, and Ryan made their way to the main hall. Courtiers and scholars from both the Zari and human delegations had gathered. The Queen had summoned a formal meeting to discuss the outcome of the recent events and to decide how the accidental pledge would be honored in a way that preserved dignity, respect, and mutual understanding. Queen Leorethia stood at the center of the hall, her presence commanding yet composed. Ethan felt a mixture of nervous anticipation and confidence. He had faced challenges before, but this moment carried a weight unlike any other. The eyes of many species, both human and Zari, were upon him, waiting to see how he would conclude the series of misunderstandings that had begun with a simple speech. Ethan Brooks. The Queen began, her voice clear and melodic. The past days have been unusual, yet illuminating. You have been observed, your actions noted, and your character evaluated. It is now time to discuss the resolution of your pledge. Ethan straightened and bowed respectfully. Your Majesty, I am prepared to do whatever is required to honor the principles I have learned and the respect I hold for your people. The Queen nodded, turning to the court. This human has demonstrated courage, honesty, and integrity in the face of confusion and misunderstanding. He has engaged with our customs sincerely and has shown that even when intentions are unclear, actions can reflect honor. A murmur spread through the hall. The rival factions, who had once questioned Ethan's intentions, now looked at him with measured respect. The Queen's words were a recognition that his behavior had transcended the initial mistake, proving the value of human character. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling a sense of relief but remaining vigilant. Your Majesty, he said, I understand the weight of my words and I accept responsibility for the misunderstanding. I also recognize the importance of acting with integrity and building trust through consistent, honorable actions. The Queen smiled, a subtle but genuine expression. Ethan Brooks, your understanding is evident. You have honored the spirit of the pledge through conduct, thoughtfulness, and respect. In doing so, you have proven that humanity can engage with our culture with insight and integrity. The assembly continued with discussions on how to formalize this understanding without creating unnecessary complications. Advisors from both species explored options, balancing Zari tradition with human expectations. Ethan participated actively, offering honest input, acknowledging limitations, and proposing solutions that emphasized cooperation, fairness, and mutual respect. One proposal suggested a symbolic recognition that acknowledged the pledge's significance without binding Ethan personally in a literal sense. Another involved shared projects between human and Zari teams to demonstrate commitment to collaboration. Ethan supported both ideas, seeing them as ways to honor the spirit of the pledge while avoiding coercion or misunderstanding. As the day progressed, Ethan moved through various sessions, mediating discussions, clarifying points, and helping both sides reach agreements. His presence became a bridge, a human example of integrity and adaptability. The Zari scholars began to see not just a human diplomat, but a representation of humanity's ability to learn, adapt, and honor commitments even in complex and unfamiliar circumstances. During a quiet moment, Queen Leorethia approached him. Ethan Brooks, she said softly, you have navigated these days with skill and integrity. You have honored our customs in spirit, even when the letter of the law could not apply directly to you. That is a rare achievement. Ethan bowed slightly. Your Majesty, I am grateful for your patience and guidance. I have learned more than I could have imagined about your people, your culture, and the value of sincerity and respect. She inclined her head. And in return, you have given us insight into human character. Strength is not only in physical power or authority, but in courage, honesty, and the willingness to face responsibility. As the day drew to a close, formal agreements were signed, not as a result of coercion or misunderstanding, but through mutual respect and clear communication. The accidental pledge had been transformed from a source of tension into a demonstration of humanity's strengths, adaptability, moral courage, and the capacity to act with integrity. Ethan watched as members of the court, previously skeptical, nodded and conversed with him and his human delegation. The Queen's smile and occasional questions showed that trust had been built and that human qualities had earned respect. Ethan felt a deep sense of accomplishment, not from personal gain, but from the successful representation of humanity in a complex, alien environment. Claire whispered as they left the hall. "You did it. Ethan, you turned a mistake into a demonstration of what humans can achieve," Ryan added. "And you did it without losing integrity. That's what matters most." Ethan nodded, feeling a sense of pride tempered by humility. He understood that the true success was not in the formal resolution, but in the recognition that humans could rise to meet challenges through honesty, courage, and respect. That evening, as he walked through the palace gardens with the Queen, Ethan reflected on the journey. The glowing plants, the softly swaying trees, and the tranquil atmosphere created a sense of peace that contrasted with the tension of the past days. The Queen spoke of tradition, honor, and the value of learning from others, and Ethan listened attentively. Sharing his own thoughts on human principles and experiences, they paused at a gently flowing fountain, and Larathia looked at him. "Ethan Brooks, today you have shown that even when misunderstandings occur, integrity and courage can transform outcomes. Your species has much to offer, and I am pleased to have seen it firsthand." Ethan smiled, feeling the weight of the past days lift. "Your Majesty, it has been an honor to learn and to represent humanity. I hope this is the beginning of a lasting friendship and collaboration between our peoples." She nodded. "It is. The accidental pledge, though unintended, has proven that understanding, respect, and integrity can bridge the greatest of differences. That is a lesson worth remembering." As Ethan returned to his quarters that night, he felt a profound sense of satisfaction. What had begun as a misunderstanding had evolved into a moment of learning, trust, and human triumph. He had faced uncertainty, cultural complexity, and political tension, and had navigated it with honesty, courage, and integrity. Humanity had been represented not just in words, but in actions, proving that even in the most challenging circumstances, character could define outcomes. Lying down, Ethan reflected on the journey. He realized that mistakes were inevitable, but the response to them, honest, thoughtful, principled action, could turn errors into opportunities. The Queen's recognition, the court's respect, and the agreements reached were not simply about resolving a misunderstanding. They were about building bridges, fostering trust, and demonstrating the true strengths of human nature. Ethan closed his eyes, content in the knowledge that humanity had gained something greater than compliance or conquest. They had earned respect, demonstrated integrity, and forged connections that would shape the future of interstellar relations. The accidental pledge had been transformed from a potential disaster into a story of courage, honesty, and the power of human character, a story that would be remembered for generations across both worlds. Although the formal resolution of the accidental pledge had been achieved, Ethan Brooks soon realized that the real work had only begun. The lessons learned in the palace had given him insight, but translating that understanding into practical, lasting collaboration between humans and Zarai would require careful planning, diplomacy, and patience. He woke to the soft hum of the palace in the early hours, the walls glowing gently with a living light. Claire and Ryan were already up, preparing notes for the day's tasks. The Queen had requested a series of meetings focused on trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and the establishment of a permanent liaison between Earth and the Zarai Empire. These sessions were not formal ceremonies, but real-world tests of human adaptability, ethics, and judgment. As they entered the main council chamber, Ethan was struck by the fluidity of movement among the Zari delegates. Their motions were graceful, almost like a dance, and yet purposeful. Every gesture, every expression conveyed meaning. He reminded himself that understanding the subtleties of this culture was not just words, but body language, timing, and context. The first session focused on establishing a joint research initiative. Humans had technology and ideas the Zari had never seen. While the Zari had knowledge of environments, energy sources, and interstellar navigation that humans lacked, Ethan listened carefully to each suggestion, weighing possibilities and asking thoughtful questions. His goal was to create a plan that was practical, respectful, and mutually beneficial. Claire leaned over and whispered, "They're watching how you negotiate. Not just the outcomes, but your demeanor and fairness. Every decision matters," Ethan nodded. He was aware that the same qualities that had helped him navigate the accidental pledge, honesty, clarity, and integrity, would serve him again. He ensured that every proposal respected Zari traditions, was transparent, and allowed input from both sides. The Zari Queen observed silently, occasionally interjecting with questions that challenged his assumptions. Ethan appreciated these moments. They forced him to think critically, to defend human reasoning without arrogance, to demonstrate that humans could handle responsibility with maturity. He realized that this was another form of testing, one that went beyond ceremonial vows into the realm of practical, real-world competence. Later, he was introduced to a group of young Zari scholars. They were curious about human culture, technology, and philosophy. Ethan spent hours discussing Earth's history, scientific achievements, and ethical frameworks. He emphasized the importance of learning from mistakes, adapting quickly, building trust through actions rather than words alone. The students listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions that revealed intelligence and insight beyond their years. In the afternoon, Ethan accompanied Queen Larathia on a tour of the palace's laboratories and archives. The Queen explained the significance of various technologies, their applications, and the history behind them. Ethan was fascinated by their approaches to energy, medicine, and environmental control. He asked questions, taking notes, and proposing ideas for potential collaboration. The Queen nodded, clearly interested in his perspectives, and occasionally smiled at his curiosity and enthusiasm. As evening approached, Ethan reflected on the progress made. The accidental pledge, once a source of stress and uncertainty, had inadvertently created opportunities for dialogue, learning, and mutual respect. He realized that even misunderstandings could become catalysts for positive change if approached with integrity and thoughtfulness.